wanted to first of all thank you very much and welcome you to this session, which is all about demystifying leadership in children's social work. And this is part of Social Work Week of 2023, which obviously we've got a few events going on, and there's lots of events happening across the social work sector to celebrate social workers and the amazing work you all do every day with families. So welcome. I'm Mary Jackson. I'm Frontline's Chief Executive. I've met many of you, but looking forward to sort of sharing the space with many more of you. I have been working within social work been in the social world for coming up to 20 years. Before joining Frontline 9 years ago, very specifically working in local authorities to help sort of identify ways that they could work most effectively with children and families, or empower their social workers to work most effectively. So very much from a sort of cultural change perspective. And that brings me very kind of neatly to Frontline, where our entire kind of focus is really on improving the outcomes for children and families, ensuring that their life chances aren't limited by their family or social circumstances. So everything we do is very much around that. And we're really clear at Frontline that excellent leadership is very core to creating, both in terms of social work practice, but also from a local authority or organisational perspective, in enabling good social work practice to happen. And it's really good, strong leadership at the top of organisations that creates the culture which enables good work to happen with children and families, and for children and families to remain the focus of all practice at every level. We're also really clear that there are lots of challenges within the social work system, and again, that leadership can play a real role in kind of navigating any obstacles that might be put in front of social workers and get in the way of them doing great work with children and families. So again, that's very much our ethos at Frontline, is supporting those conversations and developing those skills. We're 10 years old this year, Frontline as a charity, and leadership's been a key part of all of our programs throughout our 10-year history. So both on the first line and headline programs, where we talked about training managers at different levels to become social workers, and now more recently through the Pathways program, where we train managers at all levels of the social work system to think about how they want to lead their teams and how they want to create the culture to enable good practice. But less obviously, we also train social workers on our Frontline program around how to use leadership in their social work practice. So we're very much of the believers that personal leadership is as important as hierarchical leadership, and that you need to be an inherent leader and bring leadership qualities to be a great social work practitioner. So we're very strong believers that that leadership is both key to good social work, and that it's very much something that can be developed and taught across people's careers and through life. We have 4 core leadership capabilities that we teach on all of our programs, which we believe kind of work in a circular way, but start with maintaining curiosity, move to providing clarity, then on to managing complexity, and then finally expanding capability and capacity. So those are the sort of 4 C's we call them, but that will underpin all of our teachings across our programs on leadership. So very much this session wanted to explore some of the myths that we believe exist in social work, in leadership, generally, but social work possibly specifically, and certainly our panel is representing perspectives of social work from across different perspectives. So what we wanted to do was bring in leaders from social work to really explore and tackle some of those myths, which is what we'll be doing today. So our speakers will talk about what leadership means to them. They'll talk about some of their experiences that sort of bring that to life. And they'll also talk about challenges they've faced, and as a result of those challenges, what learning they've had across the course of their careers. So what we were going to do is sort of go into a little bit around those myths. I think probably people have seen in the invitation what those myths are, but I'll set them out now, and then I'll open up our room to our panelists to kind of have a discussion between themselves on this. But first myth is that your position determines leadership, or the quality, whether you're a leader or not is determined by your position. Myth 1. Myth 2, leadership can't be taught, which I've already given away a clue that my views on that, but yeah, it'd be interesting to hear other people's. And then the third myth is that leadership is essentially just good management. So we want to really get into the detail of some of those. Some of them are contentious, some of them aren't. But our first question, first myth really that we want to pose to our panelists is that position determines leadership. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get panelists to introduce themselves as I hand over to them or as they answer, to give you a bit of sense of their background and experience. And once we've gone around the panel room, we'll go back to our first panelist to talk about the myths. So Caroline, I think you're going to, first of all, if you could start the introductions, and then we'll come back to you in terms of what whether position determines leadership. But yeah, first of all, please introduce yourself.
Thanks, Mary, and thanks for inviting me as well. It's great to be here this week in this session. So I'm Caroline Hope. I'm a partner in Deloitte, where I sit in our public sector consulting practice, and I look after pretty much all of the work that we do that involves social work in various different guises, from working on the Children's Services Innovation Programme, Department of Education, through to, at the moment, working with a client where we're trying to really transform inpatient mental health services. And I kind of think a big part of my role is making sure we've got voice of social work and real connections to outcomes for people using services and their families, absolutely centred in the heart of our work. I spent, gives away my age in part. I was trying to work out whether the numbers really added up, and I realised they were a little bit under. So I spent probably 15 years of my life in frontline social work, local government, the voluntary sector, a little while overseas, mostly here in the UK, and I've spent the last 13 years in the private sector, having kind of moved from that, working much more with individuals, through to now working at system level, but managed to keep social work very much in the heart of my work.
Brilliant, thanks, Caroline. Tim, do you want to jump in next?
Yeah, thanks, Mary, and really good to be invited here too. I'm Tim Aldridge. I'm the Corporate Director for Children and Young People Services in the London Borough of Newham. I'm a social worker. I've been a social worker over 20 years now. Currently my role is overseeing sort of services for education and children's social work in Newham. And sort of my most recent experience has been sort of leading the improvement journey for Newham and moving from inadequate to good in the last 3 years. Thank you, Mary.
Thanks, Tim. Can I hand to you, Aminah?
Hey everyone, my name is Aminah. I am a Frontline Fellow from the 2020 cohort and a social worker in family safeguarding based in Hertfordshire.
Thank you. And last but not least, go on, Heather.
Hi everyone, my name's Heather Wheat. I'm a team manager in the Children Looked After and Leaving Care service in Islington, so I manage a team there. I'm also a Frontline Fellow and did that a few years ago, having been in social work now probably for about 10 years.
Amazing, thank you. All right, fantastic panel. That's looking forward to hearing what you've all got to say. Caroline, I'm going to come back to you now with myth one, but with a little bit of a pre-warning, but position determines leadership. Take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. So I love this myth. Well, I mean, I loathe this myth, but I like this myth as one to talk about. And Mary, you opened by talking about the positional leadership and hierarchical leadership. And I guess in my mind, I'd push it almost a little tiny bit further than that. And because I also think about leadership as being something that's the difference between a verb and a noun. So that kind of hierarchical leadership or authority, I think, can often get confused with actually what does leadership really mean. And to me, I think so often we kind of overlap those two things. We think that because somebody has a position of authority, then they also are leaders. And certainly in my life and in my work experience, I've worked for many people who have a position of authority and have undertaken not a single act of leadership in the whole time that I've known them. And so that kind of conflating of those two things, to me, is kind of central to the demystifying this myth that leadership is about how you use your position to ask questions that other people might shy away from in pursuit of making progress on something that's really important. And that, of course, means that you can do it from wherever you sit, in terms of your hierarchical position, but also in terms of your various hats and roles that you have in life, not just about your role in work, but also your role in society as a citizen, as a member of communities. That it's about those acts and the questions that we ask.
Yeah, thanks, Caroline. I think that verb and noun is a really interesting thought. Any other sort of thoughts on that from others? Go on, Tim.
Yeah, I was just going to say, no, really interested in hearing what Caroline had to say, and yeah, I sort of agree. Hierarchy or roles can often be seen as a shorthand of whose voice needs to be heard, and I think there's a real mistake, isn't there, to think that people in certain positions have a more valid voice than others. And I suppose just thinking back in terms of sort of leadership, thinking through my career, I suppose as practitioners, social work practitioners, I see social workers as agents of change, and I don't think you can be an agent of change without being a leader in some way, and that's sort of very much. And I think good leadership, i.e., the position of being a leader, is about creating the conditions and the freedoms, I suppose, to a certain extent, for people to find their own sort of leadership within the organisation.
Right, thank you. That makes perfect sense. It's the almost job of a positional leader is to grow leadership in others and enable that within the system. Yeah, thank you. Aminah, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, I find it interesting. Oh, sorry, I've got a bit of an echo.
No, you're fine.
Okay. I can hear an echo. Don't know if that's just me.
You're coming through loud and clear this end.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, so I was just sort of reflecting back on my time as a student, and I definitely had those narratives of conflating power with, that hierarchical structure and power of positions of authority, etc. But I think, I definitely was struggling with sort of imposter syndrome and thinking that, I need to be sort of, I'm not qualified enough to do this, or I'm being very managed and things like that. But I feel like, I felt like I could put my ideas forward, but looking back now, I realised actually there was sort of pockets of times when I could, exhibit leadership. So chairing meetings, advocating for families, and I think it was really important having sort of hierarchical leadership that allowed me to be able to express how I was feeling or advocate for those families that helped me to do that. And I guess even thinking about that, mentioning sort of social workers and power, and then sort of when we're working with families, sort of automatically we hold that position of power for many families, and it can feel like sort of we're leading them, but then part of our values as social workers is to work together with families and build those relationships so they can feel empowered to become leaders in their own lives. So obviously, we're looking at sort of social work, the leadership within social work, but also how do you help families become sort of leaders as well?
Yeah, amazing. I think exactly right, isn't it? The sense of your role as a social worker and where you had I like the pockets of power and kind of influence is a great point. Heather, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I suppose one of the thoughts I was sort of thinking about in terms of when I started off as a manager in only managing a very small team in comparison to now, and probably like most people in this room, we don't want just good enough parenting for our children and young people. We want them to thrive, and that's the same for you as a leader managing a team, and whether that's a team of 2 or 3 practitioners, you want the children that we're caring for to be able to have the best opportunities and to thrive. And that should be the same as whether you're a corporate director or a team manager. If your team is thriving and enabling our young people to thrive, then that's the difference between having that good leadership and that good management. But I think the challenge often is if you've got a culture where you have got that hierarchy and you've got managers that really want to show their authority, and that's the way that they want to lead, and your leadership style is different, the conflict within our services can be super challenging if your way of leading means that sometimes your voice is quietened because you're having to work within a service where others do speak louder. I think it's a real big challenge for us middle managers.
Yeah, I'm interested in that, Heather, because I guess I know firsthand from many local authorities that it's absolutely possible to lead a team and do brilliant social work, even if you're in a setting where that's not necessarily encouraged. And so that kind of individual, I'm interested in one, back to your point, Tim, around the idea of that it's the role of a leader, whether you be a team leader or a service or a directorate leader, to grow that appetite in others. And therefore your point, Heather, around the fact that if you're not that type of leader, you're going to quash that by the same token. So I'm curious about people's experiences of creating, like growing leadership in others, whether either the conditions around you are encouraging that or the opposite.
Yeah, I was going to come in if that's okay. So just briefly, I think context is so important, isn't it? There are times when whatever your style of leadership, you need to take. I think you often need you can need to take a more directive sort of approach, whether that's dealing with a crisis like during COVID, or dealing with a sort of an emergency on a caseload. You know, that sometimes you need to be more directive as a leader. But I think you know, I really agree with Heather though. Sort of if you stand back and think about things more sort of globally, I think creating that climate where people do feel sort of empowered to lead at whatever level they're at is so important, and that culture is more important than anything else. I think the leader does. It's setting a climate and setting a culture where you create that sort of psychological safety, I think, for the organisation. I think that's so key.
Thanks, Tim. Caroline, yeah, jump in.
No, yeah, could I dip in? I think, you know, one of the things that really struck me that listening to Aminah and to Heather was about, you know, times in my life when I've really felt determined to use my leadership position and voice to make progress, even when it's felt like the odds were stacked against me, you know, even when that's felt like sweeping water up the hill. And I think the thing that just popped into my head is how you get that balance right between making sure that you are safe enough in your own role such that your voice can be edged forward. And I know where I've got it wrong. It's where I've been so outspoken when an organisation has been so unready to listen that I've literally just been sort of rejected whole scale. And actually, I think through my career, I've got much better at gauging how the capacity of an organisation to cope with some of the things that I might say. So kind of regulating that rhythm. And I think, you know, trying to work across social care and health would be a great example of that kind of challenge, just trying to get it right, keeping pushing forward, but knowing when to lean off, to kind of self-protect, recharge, and then to, you know, to lean back in again. So that kind of regulation and looking after yourself and thinking about how able other people are to move with you sort of feels to me like that's a part of what we're talking about there.
I think that's a great point. I'm interested if you have any ideas. So you're sort of talking about having learned that across your career and more experience. For those with less experience, or who have, you know, who struggle with that more generally, are there any tips that you can bring around how to monitor that?
I mean, I guess at its most simple level, I think there's something for me about, first of all, I think where I made mistakes, it's where I didn't really spend enough time understanding the context. So I often talk about working out how to fit in order that you can make choices about when to stand out. And so that doesn't mean constantly kind of, I don't know, you know, reshaping yourself, but it's just about actually understand the context a little bit so that, you know, if I'm going to make a big point on this particular issue that might be very difficult, I know I'm making that point. So I'm not upsetting everybody by mistake. And I think it's the difference between being a bit reckless and versus being kind of thoughtful and conscious and considered about everything around you. And I think, I mean, when you're working in the front line, that's absolutely what you're doing with children and families, right? But so yeah, that kind of pacing, getting that pace right, fit in, and then stand out.
That's great, thank you. And kind of consider others' perspectives. Tim, I've got a sense you might want to come in. The enthusiastic nodding is giving me a clue.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, no, just from what Caroline was saying, I think a lot of it boils down to relationships, doesn't it? You know, and how you establish those relationships, and you establish your ability to influence others, I think, as part of a group. And I think the other thing that sort of went through my mind when Caroline was speaking was, you know, a lot of people think of leadership in terms of being very vocal, very loud, very dominant. And actually, I think the best leaders have that quality of self-awareness, that ability to listen, and perhaps aren't always the loudest voice in the room. I think that's something else to think about.
Yeah, that's a great shout. Aminah or Heather, would you like to come in at all on any of those things? I'm interested in particularly Aminah. Oh, go on, Heather, you go first.
No, I was just thinking, it just reminded me of when, well, I suppose being brave and having feedback, you know, particularly as you're starting off as an early manager, I was just thinking about when we did 360 feedback as part of the Frontline thing. I mean, it's a pretty daunting experience, but probably the most rewarding I've had, in the sense that there was something very small, or at the time the practitioner thought it was a very small bit of feedback, and it really struck me. And what she said is, when I run around the office, my energy levels actually make her feel anxious, and that if I don't appear calm, she doesn't feel calm. And I mean, I was like, what? I was like, do I run around the office? And on reflection, I really did. I would run from place to place, and that was kind of my style, and my arms would be everywhere and, you know, full of energy. I mean, it's probably not changed massively, but it really made me understand and realize the impact that I needed to demonstrate to her that she's safe. She's able to get on and do her job because I've got it in hand. I'm relaxed. I know what's going on. I'm here if you need me. I'm open conversation. I'm ready. And that has really carried through. So I managed a team of 6 back then and 34 now, or up to 34. I now am very purposeful when I walk around the office, that I might be manic inside because there's all these competing demands and I want to have a meltdown. But you're mindful of the impact that has on, you as a leader. You are leading this group of people, and if I'm anxious and panicked, that is only going to be created and filtered down to the rest of my team.
That is a great reflection, Heather, and I agree around that. But it's interesting that speaks to the two, Caroline and Tim's points around both understanding others' perspectives, which you've got through that 360 feedback, and having the relationship that means your team member can tell you how they're feeling, and that can be fed in. So that's a great example. Thank you. Aminah, I'm wondering about, because I guess there must be perspectives. You earlier in your career, you must have had kind of experiences where you felt like not quite sure where to judge that. What guides you in those moments?
Yeah, I think I definitely struggled initially, and I guess it goes down to how safe I felt to be able to express how I was feeling. But I think definitely when I went into my ASYE year, and we had a change of management as well, and I remember one of the service managers actually said to me, "Well, you're working with the family. Tell me what you know. Like, we've got it on paper." And I think that what made me realize well is that actually our voice is so important, because something on paper might not look great, but when I've been working with the family for an X amount of time, I have better knowledge of what is going on. I can advocate for those families better about what is important, what they need, what support, etc. they'd require. And I remember when she said that to me, it was almost like a green light for me to say, hey, I can say what is important and what is needed for this family. So again, I mean, it goes back to, I think I'm lucky that I've been able to be in an environment where they are able to allow me to develop my leadership.
That's great. Thank you. That's I like the green light idea. That's a really great example. Okay, I'm going to move us on to myth 2. I think lots of good thoughts right there. Hang on to any other thoughts you've got, because hopefully we'll have a chance for questions at the end, but certainly any other contributions very welcome. They may well come up in the other myths as well. But our second myth is leadership cannot be taught. And Aminah, I'm going to come to you on this one.
Yeah, I mean, there's an analogy that I really resonate with, and I've used a couple of times as well when I think about leadership, and it's this idea that we're like driving instructors and our families are like they're in the driving seat. So our goal is to get to the same destination, but as the instructor, we're supporting them, encouraging them, sort of challenging them as a driver, so that they can eventually drive that car themselves. And if we ever run into a crisis, we can sort of use our pedals and guide them, brake them. I mean, I could go on with that metaphor, but ultimately we're there to help support them to become independent. And that's what I think leadership is all about. It's about being able to build those relationships where you can focus on strengths, encourage people, but also you know when to step in and give more support. Thinking about leadership within sort of the organization as well. Again, looking back at my sort of time as a student, I think I was really sort of lucky in my ASYE. When my caseloads increased, I had a manager who's really able to hone in on my strengths, but also be able to challenge me so that I could grow because of her management style, because it was rooted so much in her core values of why she practiced social work. I think we were both able to work together in an environment that I felt safe enough to develop that practice. I appreciate not everyone's obviously lucky enough to be in that environment. That's why I think it's so important to teach that good leadership, so that we're able to foster and nourish those environments within social work, so that we can do the best for our families. And that's obviously the reason why I'm taking part in the Step Forward programme as well, so that I can continue to develop my leadership skills as well.
Thanks, Aminah. I love that, the driving analogy, but even that, beyond that, the sense that even as a driving instructor, you need your leader to help you kind of instruct, you know, so it's got so many levels to it, hasn't it? For those who aren't aware, Step Forward is a new program it's about to launch on Monday. Actually, I'll see you there, Aminah. But it's essentially for people who are social workers, either within local authorities or not, but who want to progress into the next step. So it's much more of a progression kind of leadership program. But yeah, just for those not aware of what that phrase was. Anyone else want to think come in on this point? Tim, go on.
Yeah, I mean, I think that sort of myth is about the idea that there are innate qualities within all of us, and I think it may be the case that certain people might not necessarily be a great leader, and that's in a sense, I think, about, you know, their willingness and ability to learn. And perhaps some of the things we were talking about earlier around self-awareness, around willingness to accept feedback. So I can understand why there's a view that's, you know, there are qualities that perhaps you need to be a good leader, but I think absolutely leadership is all about learning, and learning all the time. And you know, in a way that's because with each sort of new role or new context, I think you need to be able to adapt and change the way you lead. But equally, I think there is a real risk, I think, as a leader, that you get comfortable, you get complacent, you get used to the way you lead, and you know, that gets disrupted either because something goes badly wrong, or because you've got the opportunity to keep getting feedback and to keep learning. But yeah, no, I think you know, sometimes it is about those really difficult experiences in leadership where you learn the most, and I think a lot of leadership is, you know, I wouldn't say it's courage, but I think it's although there's an element of courage in leadership, but I think it's that ability to take risks and to step outside the place you feel comfortable and to try new things, but equally have the support and the scaffolding to support that learning. So I've had a mentor or a coach, you know, on and off for many years now, and I absolutely need that other person to reflect back to me and to challenge me. I know that.
I wondered about that if for those in a that's not, you know, as supportive as some of the scenarios you're all describing, but also the sense of the leadership with when you're in frontline practice or not. What Tim, if you can think about, because there's no shortage of challenges in social work, so there's always going to be people having to kind of rethink why they're, you know, how they approached it, whether that was the right approach, sort of take stock. But when people perhaps in a more hierarchical leadership position, but generally find themselves sort of set in their ways, what could individuals do to kind of prompt a bit of different thinking?
Yeah, well, I think I think it is about sort of finding ways to introduce conversations which are able to challenge the way things are done, and I think finding constructive ways to provide that feedback. And you know, we talked a bit earlier about relationships, and I think, you know, good sort of restorative cultures are ones where people are open to feedback and open to learning and open to trying things differently. So I think just being able to have the conversations which explore other ways of doing things and the benefits or the disadvantages of a particular approach is really important.
So being open to potentially going into uncomfortable places that you might not naturally head into, but being willing to sit with that for a bit. Yeah. Okay.
No, absolutely.
Brilliant. Thank you. Heather or Carolyn, anything to add on this one?
I'll let Caroline go first.
I came off mute and I was going to go back on so that you could. I think one of the things that fascinates me about this is this kind of the sort of difference, I guess, between sort of technical learning and teaching and, you know, kind of classroom sort of stuff, where I think there are undoubtedly tools and techniques that can be kind of offered up for people in a sort of more classically taught sort of way that might help with your resilience or give you the opportunity to, even, I mean, I've had imposter syndrome the whole of my career, but I hide it quite well now, as I guess most people do. And some of that is because I've been taught techniques to hide it. Like that's, even if I feel small, like don't act small, act bigger. And so there's kind of things that you literally can just be taught that you can just practice and get better at. And then of course there's this other kind of learning or teaching that is about creating the space, making it safe, being allowed to making yourself open, but also allowing yourself to be in a place where you're comfortable to challenge others in a slightly different way, to get edging each other into that discomfort that might be needed in order to really kind of open yourself up to sort of what I would call light bulb change in the way that you lead or the way that you act and behave and shape cultures. So I think it's those kind of, in my mind, there's the space for both actually. And again, if I think about my own career, I think both have been really, really important. That sort of reflective, personal growth that encompasses bits of discomfort, feedback in the way that Heather was talking about, that kind of stuff, and then just some really nice, bits of teaching that you come away from a half-day course thinking, oh, I'm so much more confident in my ability now to stand in a room full of men and have this conversation. That's okay.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. It's making me think, you'd ideally have.
Mary, you're on mute.
You popped on mute, Mary.
That's me not having a mouse. I was just saying that the technical should ideally feed into the behavioural, and you'd hopefully have the one leading the other. But I'm also thinking in a systemic sense of kind of first order to second order change. First order is always going to make some impact, but you really want that deeper, long standing to bring about ongoing change. Heather, go on. Do you want to come in as well?
Yes, just really quick. I suppose like Aminah was saying, or just the way that you sort of described and gave your reflections, it was empowering and motivating, creative. And I think that for me is the difference between listening to someone that's leading change or leading a conversation versus the management. So, our service has just gone from good to outstanding over the last few years, like despite the global pandemic. And I don't think we could have achieved that through good management. I think good management would have been, our outcomes could have been ticked, but I don't think it would have meant our practitioners, when they're sat in front of Ofsted, can talk passionately about their young people through all areas, to have that safety. We're lucky enough that we've got a stable workforce, so our young people are having the same experience throughout their life. And I think that those things are not always measurable in terms of that relationships. Obviously, Tim was talking about the importance of that relationship across the relationships we have with our young people, and then those that, our networks that we're working with. For me, that's the difference between managing and then leading an organisation.
Yeah, that's it's almost like you knew what myth 3 was, Heather. That's the perfect segue. You've just kind of signed yourself up for answering this one first. But I think that's absolutely spot on. Is and I love the way you described that in terms of the vision and the value base underneath it. But tell us again, the myth is leadership is just good management. That's myth 3. Takes us to that. So what would you give us a couple of examples of what sits within management, what sits within leadership, or more generally your views on that point?
So I suppose if I'm just thinking about sort of our recent Ofsted and what was required for us to sort of put forward in terms of our outcomes and how we're measuring things, I think for me, when I was, sat down and sort of asked about what's happening in terms of the culture and ethos within our service, although outcomes were very important, what we were able to describe is how the service has led the change and how we have gone from one point, and it's all been on the basis of a shared vision. We have people, we've collectively talked about what we want as a service to provide to our children and young people, and how we're then going to sort of come about it. And I think reviewing that, and there's a lot of time that has been missed within our service, in the sense of things are so chaotic that you don't always invest in those conversations. And I think going through things like Ofsted really makes you realise that the relationships you have with your team and your service are crucial for that change to actually take place. And I feel very lucky that maybe my management style means there's a lot of laughter in the office, there's a lot of smiles, everyone's bringing in food, we're managing to keep staff. There's things like that makes us realise that the culture and ethos that we have, and obviously if any of my team were here, I'm sure they'd be like, well, Heather, this isn't working right. But we have that opportunity to say, things aren't working well, or this is what I want to work on that's working well. And I think good management is therefore, you know, it's amplified by what then good leadership is in terms of that conveyor belt of feedback and creative change.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I can't help but think that again, it's sort of like good approaches snowball. So can when things aren't feeling comfortable, or there's a bit of risk in the system and people don't feel confident, that it can have a negative effect as well, can't it? But I'm interested in other people's thoughts on that one. Tim, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I guess if we're talking about leadership at every level, I suppose one question might be is what is good management? If not demonstrating some leadership credentials, but if I understand it in a way of sort of management being more focused on perhaps the transactional or getting things done, I think leadership perhaps is, you know, as others have said, creating a bit more of a vision, something that's a bit more focused on explicitly and deliberately creating a sort of culture and a climate. And I think, you know, certainly sort of coming to Newham sort of 3.5 years ago, you know, they just had an inadequate Ofsted inspection. People were feeling pretty crap, if I can say that, and the whole place was pretty sort of dispirited. And I think, you know, my job as a leader, if you like, was to try and inject some hope into the situation. And I think the one word I probably would want to use that probably sort of sums up what we've done over this time, I think it's leading with kindness. I think that's probably been the most important quality to bring that sort of humanity and that focus on the people in the organisation. I mean, there were loads of other things we had to do as well, but leading with kindness, I think, was absolutely critical.
Thanks, Tim. That sort of comes back to that central point of relationships and safety and all of those principles that mean that your workforce are with you. So yeah, that's great. Thank you. Other thoughts? Aminah.
Yeah, I'm just going by what Tim said about what I guess we would consider as good management. And I guess I know Heather was speaking before about outcomes. And I guess you have, you know, sometimes people will focus on the outcome stats, making sure everything's in on time. But then there's little reflection done on the management style. And then that team might lack support and face burnout. Or you could have a manager who is always supportive and she's very well liked, or he's very well liked, but then they don't challenge their staff, so then they can't promote that growth. And I think in order to get the best out of your staff is to be able to, and be that best leader, is to be able to have that balance of supporting them, but then also being able to challenge them as well. And I think, you know, a manager with good leadership skills will be able to be reflective in their own practice, and that will give their staff that space to be reflective too, because then that's where you can be malleable and sort of adapt to the changing climate, etc. But I think ultimately, when I think about good management and leadership together, it's about, you know, going back to the basis of what motivates us to actually do this job. I think that allows us to stay connected with other professionals within our team and with the families that we work with. And that's how we can become transformational to families.
Amazing. Thank you very much. Absolutely right.
Building on what other people have said, I think in my mind, I was kind of struggling a bit with this sort of how the two things are so, if somebody's great, then they're really good at both. They're really good leaders and they're really good at management, and that's a wonderful but possibly quite rare thing. And so I was thinking, well, what are the different elements? And one of the things that sort of popped into my mind listening to everybody else was that if leadership is about being really clear about the direction, giving permission, being really clear about the values that need to underpin everything, and in doing so almost creating the space for things to happen, then we absolutely need really good managers who are just great at being organised, getting stuff in the right place, and the kind of criticality of how safe that makes somebody feel, in a way that without it, you could be a really inspirational, visionary leader. But actually, if you can't do it yourself, how are you able to free up the capacity within your team or within your system to allow other people to move in and to make that real? And I think, you know, there's been times again in my career where I've worked with people who have been, you know, really kind of fantastic visionary leaders, and you'd love to sit talking to them all day in the pub. But the idea of actually, they're terrifying to work with, because they're not able to say, these are the right things to get the right job done, to deliver the right outcome for people. And there are times when I just kind of need you to work within this framework, within these parameters. And that particularly when you're learning yourself or you're feeling less confident, that little bit of structure, I think, helps us feel, or certainly for me, helps me feel much safer. So I think nutting those two things together is the dream. But even if you can't knot them together, if you have them in two slightly different people, even, then it's a dream combination.
I completely agree. Heather, did you want to come in?
I just like everything that Caroline just said. I think that was a thanks, Caroline. No, I think it was a really good, a nice way to kind of think about it collectively. No, it's a really useful, thoughtful combination of words there. Thanks, Caroline.
I was wondering while you were talking, Caroline, about whether it's that you need the why, which is probably predominantly leadership. You need the what, which is predominantly management, but then the how is the two things merging together, because you've got to have both feeding into that. So yeah, I couldn't agree. And I also have worked in places where it's felt more vision than kind of structure, which is tricky.
And I think sometimes you can feel then that leaves you really lacking if you have a leadership role. And I certainly, you know for myself, one of the reasons I came out of frontline social work is I couldn't see a clear career path, and I'm not very good at management. You know, that actually I need other people around me to really help make me safe and capable and able to deliver day to day. And you know, where I find myself now, I have an amazing team around me, and together we fill those gaps. But actually, you know, just and for a long time, I really beat myself up about my inadequacies at not, you know, wishing I was more organised and being able to kind of make stuff happen a bit.
So that's a great shout as well, isn't it? That sense of authenticity and sort of playing to strengths, whether it be in a frontline practice role or whether it be in a position of leadership in a hierarchical sense. That is myth 3. I don't know whether anyone's got any further. Tim,
yeah,
come on.
just gonna sort of totally empathise and sort of understand what Caroline was saying, and I think that self-awareness as a leader to know what things you are good at and where you need other people to step in to support you, I think that is so important. And yeah, I sort of remembering my time as a team manager, it was very, very hard job, and I'm not sure how good I was at it, but yeah, it was it's a whole different skill set, isn't it, I think. And the last thing I was going to say, just that sort of leadership and management piece, I think you know, that need for sometimes for leaders to be able to you know hold on to that sort of idea of a vision about how you're going to change the way you deliver services, for example, how you hold your nerve when things don't quite go right, and stick with your principles, and how you bring others with you. I think those things are key, and I think that sort of that ability to come together as a team and to manage risk together, I think again is another key thing, and how you do that in a more relational way, I think is quite important.
And I think that I thought similarly around the you said you was nervous of using the word courage, and I think it is courage, and I think it is bravery, again, both from a kind of a frontline practitioner perspective right through to kind of much more senior manager, because and again, your point around your value base and the vision being at the heart of your decision making. So, you know, the ability to kind of stand up to a manager if they're talking about bringing a child into care, and you're really clear that's not the best outcome, right through to telling your lead member that, you know, that the money can't be spent in that way and needs to be spent in this way. You know, those are, and in my experience across the country, when I see directors or ADs, it's definitely those who are most, you know, that the conviction of the vision is strong enough to hold them in good stead to have those difficult conversations, and that's when I feel most inspired by leadership and social work, I think, at a senior level. Okay, I think if I have been sent some questions, the chat is now open. All right, so people, please, we are at we've got about, I think, 10 minutes or so to answer any questions people might have. I'll read out the questions and I'll get the panel as we have to just jump in. At the moment, it would appear there are no questions. I can't believe there are people on this call who don't want to know something about what the panels have been saying. So please do feel free to ask any questions, big scale, small scale. We can obviously definitely fill the time and talk about our experiences some more, but it would be great to answer anything you might want to know as well. Very quiet crowd. Thank you, Talia. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Putting us all out of our misery. How do you overcome the difficulty of demonstrating leadership in an unsafe space? Great question. Who would like to take that? Go on, Heather. I can see reaching for the mute. No, you're not.
No, I will.
It's a really tough question. I think in my mind it goes back to that kind of thing, the point that sort of links to a point that I made earlier about working out the parameters of the kind of your the parameters that sort of set the space in which you are able to push the boundary a little bit and knowing not to push it too hard. So I think your real leadership is nearly always unsafe because it's pushing people into territories or into conversations that they might really either want to avoid or not really be ready for, or because it's edging people into slightly discomfortable places. And how you help people be uncomfortable while still feeling safe, I think, is kind of at the absolute heart of it. So for me, it's about going back to that basic of understanding where people are at, about listening, about being curious, kind of making an assessment of the situation that's facing you in order that you can at least have a guess at what's going to be really unsafe, whereas what's going to be just about copeable with for everybody else, so that you don't get rejected in your own pursuit of the direction you're trying to head in.
Thanks, Caroline. I'm going to leave it at that because we've got so many questions. I want to kind of people to have a chance to answer a few more. I've got a question from Samir. As leaders, how can you link your experiences and skill set to wider policy issues and platforms? For example, in relation to the independent review of children's social care. So, anyone want to take that one?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So yeah, just sort of we've been thinking a lot about the direction of travel and thinking about our approach to children's social care, it being a very relationship focused approach and with restorative principles, and how we as a leadership team support that work and help to shape it, and how we might work with other like-minded authorities to sort of develop that sort of movement around relationship-based practice, and how that might influence the sort of future development of practice and services. So I think that's sort of it's how you position yourself and how you really clearly set out what it is that you're offering.
Heather, I'm going to come to you with this one. What do you do if others in your team don't share your vision and values or the priorities within that?
Very stressful, but I think probably if you're in a safe space, or it's about having those really frank conversations. When I first moved into a team, I was very aware of of being a new manager and managing a huge team, some people that have been there an awful long time. I was mindful of being a white female, and my practitioners and my practice group, we're an amazing diverse group. I was also relatively young stepping in, and there was lots of hearsays about wanting me as a manager and what I wanted our vision to be. So we had to have some really open, honest, frank conversations from the beginning. And we did, our social graces. We stripped it back about why we were in this workplace, what we care about, our passion for working with young people, and the collective shared vision enabled us. I mean, we stuck it up on the walls eventually, and we look back at it now and we laugh about the journey that we went on in terms of the storming to get through to what our visions and our values were. But ultimately they came down to us wanting to provide the best service for the children and young people that we work with, despite our differences, despite our different kind of work backgrounds that we might have come from. So I think probably having those open conversations, being okay and being vulnerable to receiving feedback that isn't going to be nice, holding in mind that you're not going to get it right, you're going to get it wrong, swallowing that, have a good network of friends and peers at work that you can have those conversations with, and review it. I think reviewing these values and visions for us is really important. Nice. And something I need to go back and talk to the team about.
That's a great shout, and comes back to Tim's point earlier around needing to kind of keep questioning yourself and challenging yourself and pushing yourself. That's a great point. Aminah, can I come to you with Suzanne's question, which is, how do you challenge ineffective leadership? Don't know how much experience you've had of that, but
I think it is a really difficult one as well, especially when you think about sort of maybe your position within maybe the team or the hierarchy of that of management. But I think Heather was saying before as well about having those frank conversations, and you need to do it in a place where you feel safe. I'm not here saying, go and speak to your manager or your service manager if you don't feel safe. Speak to maybe another colleague and maybe unpick how you're feeling and find out which avenue you can go to be able to challenge in an effective way. It is really difficult because I think it is so different, local authority to local authority as well, and everyone has different experiences. When I think about sort of my own, when I felt that I needed to challenge, I've been able to unpick it with a colleague first, see, okay, what is the best route to take, and then take it from there.
I think that's really great advice. Linked to your point, Heather, around having people around you, making sure you're choosing the right people to talk to. But Caroline, do you want to come in on that? I can see you nodding. Just the same message.
Yeah, just 100% agree. Get a network of people around you.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Caroline's asking particularly to you, Tim. I'm interested in what Tim said about coaching and leadership. I was thinking about this as I was listening. Can Tim tell us more about why coaching has been so important for him?
Yeah, so it's I think sometimes you need a space outside of where you work to talk in a really free way, but also I think you want a bit of coaching to be affirming. I think because we all need a bit of sort of affirmment in terms of our confidence, but equally a really good coach, someone who's really experienced, will be able to be quite challenging as well, and draw you out of your comfort zone and challenge some of your assumptions. So I think you should probably leave a coaching session, yes, feeling generally better about yourself, but also asking yourself some quite searching questions about perhaps there's a different way to think about the problem I got stuck on. So it's about helping you see the issues you're facing from a different perspective. I think that really helps.
Thanks, Tim. Obviously, we're big fans of coaching at Frontline. It's on all of our programs, but yeah, I couldn't agree more. I've got one from Sophia here, which is, how would you gain confidence to develop and show leadership as someone who is new to social work? Anyone want to jump in on that one? Don't all come off at once.
So, I mean, just as someone new to social work, I think I remember being new to social work, and like others have said, sort of just building your network, not only within your team but across services as well, and actually start to think about the areas of interest that you've got. So one of the things I did when I was a sort of relatively new social worker was set up a group for working with children who were unaccompanied asylum seekers, and organising events and activities, and sort of developing practice in that area. So just relatively small things you can get engaged in that just takes you a little bit outside of your role, widens your network, and helps you sort of take a lead in a certain area of practice. I think that's to my mind that was a helpful experience.
Thanks, Tim. Any others want to add to anything on that?
I just want to jump in and say, I think another thing as well is to really just hone in on what kind of leader you want to be as well. I think we have, especially when you're new into social work, you see a lot of different leaders, and it's about going back to your core values and saying, okay, it's all because you're a leader doesn't mean you're a manager. So you can still look at, okay, what kind of leader do I want to be? And then keep focusing on that and going back to that, because I think we can get pulled in a lot of different directions as we develop our practice, and then going back to those core values and reminding yourself, okay, what kind of leader do I want to be for my families in work, etc. That should help as well.
Thanks, Aminah. Go on, Heather.
I was going to add, just in terms of allowing yourself some time, I know it's probably an impossible task given the job that we do, but to have that reflection on what you want in terms of your leadership. I think lots of us will know how we don't want to lead because we've had managers and a style that you think, quite, that is not how I will want to lead. And I've, during some coaching sessions I found it the other day, actually, it was great. I had a list of things of great leadership qualities that I've seen and not so great leadership qualities, and what I want to do and how I'm going to achieve them. I think, not saying write everything down, but if you are able to enable yourself some space and time, or do it with coffee, with another peer, and think, and have that reflective space to think about what you want in terms of your leadership style.
Great shout, and as you say, carving out that time, because it's not going to come. It's not going to come easily. That was a reflection from the very first line cohort. I remember really clearly asking everyone in the room why they had come on the program. Was either because they had an amazing manager and wanted to be as good as them, or they had a not supportive manager and wanted to be better than them. So that's a really great shout. Okay, I'm going to go for one more question, which I'm hoping will be a rapid fire response round. That someone's asking, it's Nicola asking, could you recommend any training resources, videos, people to follow, podcasts? So lots of options. RE leadership or leadership versus management. Any recommendations from folks before we finish up?
I've got hundreds of recommendations. I'd read Lisa Leahy's book that's called Immunity to Change.
Thanks, Karen. Others?
I've sort of been quite inspired by the sort of think about restorative leadership, and looking at the restorative window, and some of the work that Leeds have done. I think that to my mind, that's where I've drawn a lot of inspiration.
Tim, I'll throw in one that's a little bit more on the management side than the leadership side, which is Atul Gawande's Checklist Manifesto. That's a really interesting read. I'm drawn lots from he's a surgeon, but some ideas around how I've often seen sort of ways that could be adopted in social work helpfully. But yeah, there's one thought. Others? Any more?
There's some great TED Talks that we learn on the Frontline, but I can't think, it's called something like Everyday Leadership, but I can't think who it was from or by, but I'm sure we can ask some of our Frontline colleagues whether we can send out any of the great TED Talks that we learned on that programme.
Yeah, that's a good shout. We've probably got a list actually we could circulate to the attendees here today, not just that we teach on programs, because then we wouldn't want to spoil things for people coming on the programs in future, but some other resources as well that the team pulled together for various things. So we will finish up there. I'll stop putting our panelists under pressure, and say a huge thank you to everyone for signing up. I mean, I think that there's lots of takeaways for me. The kind of core, which I think have come across throughout the whole discussion, are really the relationships, creating a culture where people feel able to give feedback, and the relationships at the heart of that, but also as leaders and people being led, to be conscious of other people's perspectives and always bring that into our thinking. And those are definitely threads that we teach across all of our programs. I thought Caroline's point, particularly around the techniques versus behaviour, was a really interesting one. And again, we try to do that very much on all of our programs, including sort of pathways, where our main leadership sort of focus is, but essentially we are really clear, as you've all said as panelists today, that that's just the start, that there's a lot of work you have to do after that initial kind of injection of energy towards this, to think about how you can continue to develop and grow as a leader, and make sure you're creating the environment or encouraging, supporting the creation of the environment that enables, in our context right now, social work to happen most effectively with children and families. So a huge thank you to our panelists. Lovely to hear from you all, and very, very kind of you to join us. And a big thank you to all our attendees as well. Really great to have such a good, large group today. Obviously, struck a chord in terms of theme. So have a great rest of the afternoon, and hopefully catch some of you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.